Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest Sarbat Gupshup. My name is Makinder Chahal. I'm one of the volunteers here at Sarbat. This is the first in a series of Q&As and Gupshups that we're doing with Sarbat members from across the world. And I'm really happy to welcome Harpreet as our first guest as part of this series. So I'm going to pass over to Harpreet now, and then we can find out more about Harpreet's life and engagement with Sarbat and many, many more things across the next hour or so. If you are watching live, then please feel free, if you've got any comments or any questions which you want to give or pass on to Harpreet, you can use the Q&A box. If not, we'll continue through, and this recording will also be available on YouTube in a couple of weeks' time on the Sarbat YouTube page. But for now, I'm going to pass over to Harpreet, and we'll just take it from there. So really chill. So Harpreet, thank you for joining me today. And the reason why we're kind of like, we're doing this at a very West Coast friendly time, and I'm sitting in the UK. It's 1 a.m. here, but I'm super, super stoked to be here. So yeah, Harpreet, over to you.
Hi, which thank you for like accommodating to West Coast time. I know it's like 1 a.m. over in the UK right now. My name is Harpreet. I'm a queer Sikh in California. I've been volunteering with Sarbat for almost a year now. Yeah.
Great. And so yeah, so like you said, you're based on the West Coast, and how, when we talk about Sikhs across the world and the diaspora of Sikhs across the world, obviously I'm sure there's a large Sikh community within California. So if you could just tell me a bit about kind of like how you've found yourself within California.
Yeah, so I was actually born in India, and my whole family immigrated here when I was very young. I was 2 years old. But it was my grandfather. So it was my grandfather on my mom's side, who I'm not quite sure actually now that we talk about it, how it happened, but he moved here. And then I come from a big family. My mom has like 3 other siblings. And he slowly just like immigrated everybody over here through marriage, through just like other means of immigration. But he was the one that had like moved us all here. We actually lived down the street at his house, which we still have his house, and I'm like deeply attached. But everybody lived there. A lot of people lived there, and then it was kind of like a transitional place. Like you live there and then you move to where you're going to be. A lot of people, I mean, a lot of us, we'd move out, move back in, move out. It was kind of it was nice. It was like home. It was home for a long time.
Yeah, I really like that, and I can definitely relate to that story of of maybe like a halfway house in a way, where a lot of people coming in to kind of get their feet on the ground and establish, just establish their feet and understanding of a new country that people have moved to. And I think that to have that familiarity, I think is like really nice to have, and it sounds like it's had like quite a positive impact on you.
Yeah, well, my grandparents, I never realized how open they were to that idea. Because there was one time a woman who my uncle, like more distant uncle, fell in love with at like a gas station, super random. But she had just immigrated here from Fiji and she needed somewhere to live. And my grandparents were like, yeah, move in for some time. But it really like that, after that happened, I started like really thinking about it as that place of like, if people live here to kind of get their feet to get their feet up, and then,
No, yeah, that's great. And with like obviously California's a massive state. Like have you moved around California as it is, or have you just stayed in one location?
Well, we moved out to the Central Valley. So if you know where that's at, I live in Modesto. It's small, it's relatively smallish. It's not like it's up and coming now, but when I was growing up, it was not really the place to be. But I did for school move out to the Bay Area, which is like night and day. And I'm very thankful for my experience out in the Bay, and especially being queer, especially being um, like, well, yeah, no. So I've been moving around and I'm back in Modesto now, actually.
That's great. And spending that time like in the Bay Area compared to like where you were growing up, like what was that like? I know you kind of briefly like touched upon it, you know, it being a very different experience, but what was that like for you?
Oh, oh, I don't, did you see that?
Oh,
But that's interesting.
okay.
Okay. But that experience, yeah, again, so night and day. Well, I feel like now that we're like reflecting back in Modesto, I feel like is where I developed my Sikhi, and then I feel like in the Bay is where I developed my queerness. Which I'm kind of glad that it worked out that way, because it was just so much like I was accepted as a Sikh here, I was accepted as a queer person there. But the Bay is so welcoming. The Bay is so diverse. There's so many different people. There's so many different walks of life, people who come from different walks of life that you'll meet. And oh, I love the Bay. I'd move back like tomorrow if I could. Yeah.
And so, I mean, you've just mentioned something now that, you know, where your relationship with Sikhi was very much embedded within where you grew up. And then when you went to the Bay Area, that's kind of like where your almost like your queer journey started. I guess we just take a step back to look at your relationship with Sikhi in particular. Like, what's your relationship been like with Sikhi? Like, are you from a fairly like religious family, or what's your own personal journey been like with Sikhi?
Mhm. Well, I was born into Sikhi. My family was sick. Were sick. Was sick. But it was when I was in third or fourth grade when my parents, like my dad, you know, he used to cut his hair. I was allowed to cut my hair. He used to like socially drink a little bit, but it was when I was in the third or fourth grade that that kind of like he read a book, and I don't really know what book, but he read a book that changed everything. You know, he and my mom got so much more into Sikhi. They were keeping their hair. They stopped eating meat. They stopped drinking. That's when I remember that transitional. I remember that period, and I remember them getting I don't like getting baptized. Amarshak. I remember them going through that process. I was there actually, and I remember like doing it with them because I was a child and I didn't really know. But they were like, "This is what this means," and I was like, "Okay." But so that at that point is when they started becoming. We started kind of leaning more into Sikhi, and ever since then, I again like everything changed. So there was definitely like phases of my Sikhi. Um, that was I was very at that point when I was that young, I was allowed to cut my hair. I was allowed to do all these different things that now were taking it away from me. And so at that point I was very like, oh, I want to do this. I want to do this. And I can't because I'm religious. I can't because of this. And it wasn't something, I think it took a while for me to really like fall in love with Sikhi because of that, because I felt like it was so restricting for me. But there was a time when every weekend we were going to like not festivals but these workshops at gurdwaras, and we were, you know, sitting doing simran, and we would have like teaching classes. And I like that. I think that time was when I really really leaned into Sikhi, and I started really understanding and being really really thankful. I think that is when I chose Sikhi. I think, you know, that you're born into Sikhi and then there's a time when you choose Sikhi. And I think that's when I chose Sikhi.
No, I think it's really interesting, and I can definitely relate to that. Having an understanding of when you're surrounded by Sikhi, but not necessarily having an understanding, and as you're growing up and kind of having an opportunity to be more embedded within Sikhi and everything around Sikhi culture, culturally, as also as part of the religion too. It's kind of having, you know, having the opportunity to be able to do that. I guess, you know, a lot of people would either seize the opportunity or they'll kind of push it away, but it really sounds like you embraced it because you felt like a real connection there.
Well, I think at that point I was very much immersed in it. You know, we were there every weekend, and you develop relationships, you get to know these people. Um, but there was just I remember there were so many different babas who were coming in to speak, and there was like of all different races, and I think that was what to me was like, oh my god, like what is happening here, and you're speaking English, like. And I think that for me changed too, because understanding, because I mean I'm fluent in Punjabi, but my I can have a deeper conversation in English just because I know like there's so many words that I don't know how to translate. but having somebody just talk that spoke to me in English, that spoke to me very personally, I think that changed things. I think like, I mean, that, whoa, at that point we were doing like Simran every night after dinner, and we would just sit in the living room and like do Simran. And I remember like that was when I felt my deepest connection to our Guruji. Um, and I like, that was an incredible feeling. I remember like that's the most love I could ever describe. Like that's the only way I could describe it is like warmth and love. And oh my God, it was incredible. I don't know how else to, but
No,
that
no, it's,
also, no, but that also made me feel like, wow, Sikhi really is it. Like for me, Sikhi really is it.
yeah, no, I guess, when you get to the point where you're really, like you said, fully immersed and fully embracing and understanding and having that true love for Guru, and actually understand. And it sounds like you're very much like intertwined in
Mhm.
all elements of your life. And I think and how was that kind of like on like for how was that for you? Like, how did that impact in other areas of your life? Say, for example, like at home or during
Mhm.
school.
That's a good question. I was more at peace for sure. Like I feel like that's a really good question. That was in high school, and I'm trying to think of. Um, I mean, I remember being more like I was more easy. I mean, not that I'm not easygoing now, but everything just not that nothing seemed to matter, but I knew there was something bigger going on. I knew there was something. And so it was really easy to deal with life because at the end of the day, I know that I'm going to be doing Simran at 6 o'clock and I'm going to feel this connection. I'm going to feel this love. And nothing else seemed to like really matter at that point. That was a
And I
really
get,
good
and
question.
having that understanding at such a young age as well. I think a lot of people, when I think back to like my teenage years, and I'm kind of like, I had a very different experience where kind of like you were very much like grounded and kind of like connected with yourself, and you could see something bigger. I think for me it was very much like school, studies, and it's like having to kind of like navigate your way around being a teenager, as well as kind of like home life, which for you sounded like you had a really nice balance there and kept you very grounded to be able to help you get through that point in your life.
Well, don't get me wrong. I was insane during high school. I feel like my hormones were, I mean, I was a teenager. I was crazy. Um, but so we did that for about, I don't think it was a full year. I think at some point we just stopped, and I don't know why we stopped. I don't think there was a reason, but we did. And that period was for sure the most peace that in within high school. But overall, no, high school was crazy. I mean, I just feel like I was doing so many different things, like with my school. Oh, that was hard because my parents immigrated here. So high school, they didn't really understand like high school in America. They don't know what like a prom is, what homecoming is, what a football game. Like they're like, why do you have to go out so late to go watch a game? You're not even playing, you know? Like that was their thing is like, but you're not playing. So that I remember that being kind of difficult because they felt like I was out for this, I was out for this, I was out for this. And to me, I'm like, but I'm going out to be in a play. I'm going out to, build this float or whatever. And they're like, no, you're this bad child because you're going out too late. And for me, it was like, but I'm doing what I think I'm supposed to be doing. So there was a disconnect there. I remember that being like a big tension in my life.
It almost has kind of like a culture clash of sorts, where especially when families have emigrated and not had, like you rightly said, not had an understanding of what US culture was like in this instance, and what school is like, or going through the school system, and actually maybe having a conflicting values in that respect of understanding how if you're doing this, it's taking away time from that. And I know a lot of the time I can, with my family too, it's about, the fear of the unknown, or not
Hmm.
necessarily having an understanding, or sometimes it could just be not knowing who to ask about having the understanding, because a lot of the time people just assume that parents would know a lot of things, but actually a lot of the time, like you rightly said, with people and families who have emigrated to new countries, it's learning stuff from scratch. And when you don't know who to turn to speak about that, you often kind of shy away from it or see it as something bad, as opposed to maybe potentially embracing it to see what great it could also do.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. I think at some point it was also there was a lot of like shying away, and I couldn't explain it as well as I could now. Like I now my youngest sister is in high school, and she'll want to go to a game, or she'll like, first of all, it's just easier for her because I did it. But also now I'm able to explain to them like, no, 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 they do this because this, like, this is why, you know? And I wasn't able to do that then. But even if I was, I don't think they would have listened because I'm their child, you know, and I'm so young. Like for them, it's like, you're just telling us this. But there was a lot of like shying away. And I think a lot of it, there was a fear of, well, if you become too American, then you're not going to be Indian. I think that was a big thing for them at some point, was like, well, what are you? What is your culture? Mm-hmm.
And so let's move on to kind of like the your queer journey. And I know you've mentioned like being, you know, kind of starting in the Bay Area, but was there ever a time where, you know, your queer journey started before you moved to the Bay Area?
It definitely did. I just never recognized it as that. Like I thought I had crushes on women. I had quick girls. I had these feelings, but I thought that was very normal. Like, cause it's so weird because all of my friends, like I had a bunch of little girl, like friends that are girls. Um, we all felt this way. And so I was like, oh, this is how normal straight people feel. Like they all have crushes on girls. And no, that's not, that's not how. So it for sure, like there was a seed that was planted out in here in the Central Valley, but it didn't grow until I got to the Bay. Is that how I should have said it?
And so it sounds like you were surrounded by friends who had had an understanding and weren't necessarily pushing you away for having these thoughts and feelings, and ultimately you were quite open to talking about your feelings with your friends too, which I know a lot of people, I know I definitely struggled with talking to my friends about anything I felt which maybe felt different from the norm.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess in that respect, it sounds quite unique that you had quite strong and positive relationships with people around you to be able to talk about
Well, it was more so like saying like, oh my, yeah, yeah, I actually did. I think I did because I felt comfortable to tell people, to tell my friends like, oh, she's very beautiful. Oh, she's very, like, oh my gosh, like I have a crush on her. But it was always like, I mean, even back then, I mean, maybe it's just me, but it didn't feel like if I went to my friends, told them, oh, I have a crush on a boy, that felt different than me telling them that I have a crush on a girl, because it felt lighter. Like having a crush on a girl felt very like la la la, like very light, very like, oh yeah, that's cute, she's attractive. But having a crush on a boy, for like, I think when I would come to them with that was more like, oh my god, what are you gonna do? Oh my god, you're in this class with them. Like more of a, like they'd freak out with me a little bit more. So there was a little bit of a difference there.
that. So then moving to the Bay Area, I imagine around the time 18, 19,
Mhm.
and kind of going into that space, and how was that for then you to then build up on exploring your queer identity from the seed that you said had been planted in the Central Valley to then going and blossoming in the Bay Area? How did that come? Like, how was that journey from that age going up?
Well, I mean, even I moved, so yeah, I did move when I was 18, when I was 18. Yeah, 18. But I didn't really, like I for sure had, I was more open with my queer, like with my feelings there. But even then I wasn't like letting it all in, if that makes sense. It wasn't until I was honestly like 23, 20, and I'm 24 now, so like a year ago, 22, 23, when I kind of started looking at myself more seriously and thinking like, is this someone, could you actually be with a woman, like outside of having a crush, outside of having these feelings, could you see yourself and having a whole relationship, like, with a woman? And that was kind of like a changing point. I went on a date with a woman, and it was just like so easy. It was so easy. And I think that kind of solidified it. I was like, okay, yeah, I could do this. I could easily do this.
So you said when you first moved to the Bay area, you had a bit of hesitancy to be able to kind of like open up. Like, what for you was going on during that time?
Yeah, well, okay. There was a lot going on at that time. I had just moved out of the house. I was finally like, I was able to do whatever I wanted whenever I wanted. I was able to go wherever, and it was, I now, because of that experience, I strongly believe that kids should be given a lot of more freedom, because I feel like I went crazy with that little bit of freedom that I finally got. Um, but I think what I was, in terms of queerness, what I was kind of dealing with is like, in my past, it's been a very light thing, a very like a side thing, like a very like, oh, this happens to everybody, it's not a big deal. So I think even though I had these feelings, it was very like I was kind of just pushing it off. But it was also like I had to unlearn that being with a woman could be a serious relationship. It could be something permanent. It could be as important as being with a man.
And when you say you had to unlearn that, like,
Mhm.
what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, growing up, like with my friends, having a crush on a girl wasn't, it was something, but it wasn't really anything. And so I kind of kept that same mentality going, being in at school, that I would have these feelings for women. And it was like, okay, well, it doesn't mean I'm going to pursue it because it's not as real or as, so I had to really get over that. I had to really think about it and be like, well, first of all, that sounds homophobic. But so really was unlearning that and accepting that that doesn't even make sense, in a home, like in a relationship.
And do you feel that it would have been more difficult for you to unlearn that if you hadn't moved to the Bay Area?
Yes, I don't even know where I would be right now if I hadn't moved out of the area. I feel like being in the Bay, I grew so much. I grew as an individual and I grew into like who I've always wanted to be. So I don't, and again, the Bay is super, super diverse. Like I feel like in the Central Valley, it's majority white. It is. And that's kind of what I grew up around. And that's a different experience than going to the Bay and having all these different people of race, gender around you. And yeah, I don't know that. I think if I continued, I don't know where I would be if I continued living in Modesto, but I'm really glad I didn't.
I can definitely relate to you on that respect, on that level where even where I grew up in a village, majority white. My family were one of two families of color in the area, and that was my whole life growing up, pretty much surrounded by white people. And actually, then moving to where I am now in Leicester, which is super diverse, and actually being fully immersed within, you know, especially South Asian culture, is something I rejected in the past, but I'm fully
Mhm.
embraced now, and has really kind of helped shape me as a person. So I guess, in that respect, kind of like looking at that diversity, how do you feel? Was it just diversity, like queer diversity, or was it like diversity of all kinds, which kind of helped you?
No, well, I don't even think, I think queer diversity for me came second. First, it was just like being around people who looked more like me.
Mhm.
Um, well, I mean, the Indian population in Modesto is pretty large, but it's very like at the Gurdwara, I would be around them, and then at school, I wasn't, and the Indians that I were around would deny their like deny not deny being South Asian, but it was rejected. Like it was rejected within. There's a lot of internalized racism for them, which is so sad. And I think at some point, like I don't think I ever denied my identity, but I ignored it. I kind of like that is not the most important part of me. So being in the Bay, being around people who were so different and were standing in who they are, in their identity so confidently, and it was I think that was like life changing for me.
And I know now you've said that you've moved back to Central Valley from the Bay. How has that transition been? Like, has it kind of been like you've learned so much and grown as a person in the Bay, and you've kind of gone back to the Central Valley, like, yes, I'm going to continue being this person? Or do you
Mhm.
feel that, as soon as you've been back in a very home environment, you kind of had to felt like you've had to tone it down, or you've had to kind of like dial back on, you know, how you've kind of grown and what shaped your thoughts, and what shaped kind of you as a person?
Mhm. I think right now I'm balancing. I don't think I'll ever go back to like who I was before. I don't think that's possible because the growth has just been so great. But I think right now I'm balancing, um, have like holding my being very expressive with my identity and who I am, while also being respectful, I guess, of the home that I'm in, and making like making sure that because a part of why I moved back in is was my coming out story. Um, and I'm back here because I wanted my family to kind of so I lived out of the home for 6 years, and they at the end of it felt like they didn't even know who I was. I've changed so much. They're like, you're not the same person that you were. So me moving back was kind of a opportunity for them to get to know me all over again. So now I'm trying to still be who I am because that's who they have to get to know, while also kind of like, honestly, it sounds bad, but making sure that they're a little bit more comfortable too. Because I don't want to make them feel like I'm an alien or whatever living in their home, you know?
And I guess that's something that isn't, unique just to queer people, but it could be to lots of different people who kind of moved away and then come back after a while, having been through some life-changing experiences, and actually being able to, in order for people, or family members before, to kind of help understand you. And I think a lot of people just see that as a bit of a shock. It's like, we just want this old person back because, this is the person who we've known for such a long time. And I guess, in relation to kind of, even when people do come out, having that understanding of, you are still the same person, you've just grown, and I'm growing into becoming an even greater person than maybe an expectation that somebody has of you.
Hmm. No, that was the biggest thing is like, they're like, no, this isn't, because my mom, she even asked me like, when did this start? And I was like, I've always been like this. Um, and she was like, no, you weren't. Like, I lived with you. You were not this person in high school. You were not this person in middle school, whatever. Um, so like that's still kind of hard because I think she still thinks, I think also like a part of it was for her, specifically for her, like, oh, if I move back, I'm gonna go back to being that person, being back to who I was. And so like now I'm having to I try my best. I mean, I'm trying to do my best in being as authentic to myself while also reminding her like every so often, like, hey, still gay. Oh my gosh. But yeah, no, it's been a transition, and I don't know. It's a process. That's all I can really like. It's a process. Mm.
And like, just taking a step back from before you moved back home to the Central Valley,
Mhm.
and when you were, exploring your queer identity in the Bay Area, as a person of color, like, what was that experience like for you? Because I know you mentioned the diversity, not just of, queer diversity, but diversity across the range, including racial diversity. But how was it being a person of color within the queer community within that space?
It was easy. It was a lot easier than what it is now. Don't get me wrong. There was a lot of like, there was still pushback. There was still homophobia, but it was accepted. It was open. It was relatively easy. I think that's an interesting question because you ask how it was like being a queer person of color, and I'm trying to really touch on the being a person of color, like to separate that.
Mhm.
Um, but it's hard because I don't really know what the white experience is, you know. Um, but for me, I surrounded myself with like the greatest friends, and it like owning who I was. They held me accountable to 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 like explore who I was, but also like to my values, to my beliefs. It was a lot of like, okay, but you said this, and I just think I surrounded myself with incredible people, and so it was relatively easy. Hmm.
I mean, you've just mentioned beliefs now, and I know you said when you mentioned before moving to the Bay, you know, Sikhi was you were very much embedded within Sikhi, and you know, having found that identity and love with Guru. When it came to moving to the Bay and exploring that your queer identity with that, how did queer life and Sikhi come together for you during that time, or did it?
It it didn't for a while. I think when I moved out, I was just not that I like denounced everything, but I ignored it. I think it wasn't until so like the first couple of years it was me just doing whatever I wanted to do. And then I think in the last few years that I was still in the Bay, I started feeling really guilty. I started feeling like you are denying and you're rejecting this part of yourself that you know means a lot to you. You're not really letting people into that part. And it wasn't really on purpose. It was just honestly, it was just easier to not. And it kind of that separation just happened so naturally. Like Siki was in the valley, and then here I was this other person. So it took a while for those to merge because at some point they had to. Like there was no way that I was gonna. It would have been really uncomfortable for me to not, go to a gurdwara every so often, or to not like surround myself with other Sikhs and have like share that experience. So it was like the last couple of years when I became a lot more involved, a little bit more involved. I'm not going to say a lot more involved, but a bit more involved. I would like go matatik every so often. If I had a test, I was for sure going to matatik before the night before, the day of. Um, but like that felt really good too, because that to me felt like, okay, you are still the same person. This is just an addition to who you are. You are not a whole different person. And that helped me when I was coming out to my parents, because I could feel comfortable in saying that I'm still who I was. I've just grown, and this is another addition to who I am.
And so it sounds like there was a period of time when you did struggle to reconcile your queerness and Sikhi, and then what was there kind of like a trigger point for you, or was there something in particular which made you think, oh, I need to actually you know retouch it within that area of my life within Sikhi without necessarily pushing it away too much? Because I think for some people may feel that they have to choose one or the other, and
Mm-hmm.
actually that reconciliation is a very difficult process to go through. And it sounds like for you, there was a time when you acknowledged that you still needed Sikhi in your life because it was a part of your identity. Um,
Well, yeah. So in terms of being queer and being a Sikh, that wasn't too much of an issue, just because Sikhi doesn't really say anything about being queer. It doesn't condemn it. It doesn't say anything. And I remember like researching, Googling that like a million times, like looking through it, like, oh, it doesn't say anything at all. So it wasn't so much that it was like the feeling of I had lost touch with some part of me that I know I loved. And so like, because again, like that, so when we were doing Simran every single night, I felt like my connection to Guru was so powerful and so strong. And it was like, I felt like I was walking towards this like light. I can't, and like it was a light at the end of the tunnel kind of thing. And I was getting closer and closer. And the closer I got, the more warm, the more love I felt. Um, and I always had that in my head. So for a long time I didn't like reject Sikhi, but I did a lot of things that like I'm sure my parents wouldn't have been proud of me. And so I think dealing with like knowing that I do these things or want to do these things, and I want to be a Sikh, so it's like that was more where I had to pick and choose, like what are you going to do, what are your limits here. um and I think a big part of it why I had to go back to Sikhi was just like the feeling of you were so close, like you were so close, you could have been there by now, like you were so close and now you're so far. Like I felt so disconnected from Waheguru. I felt so just like not lost but far, and I didn't like that. It wasn't it didn't feel good.
So it also sounds like Sikhi in a way helped you understand your queer identity as well, and actually through navigating and having that understanding of Sikhi and understanding, maybe not understanding initially your feelings of queerness, and and do you feel that like Sikhi helped you understand your own queerness in a way because of the teachings within Sikhi?
Oh, well, sort of. I mean, I remember like I researched so much within Sikhi, like the Anand courage, like what that means and what that would look like if I were queer, if I wanted to marry a woman, if I wanted, like, could I do this? Could I, and what? So I think a lot of it was research and just, it was affirming because, you know, Sikhi Gurbani talks about the Anand courage being between like two souls. I think the hard part was the Sikh culture, well, not the Sikh culture, the Punjabi culture, the Punjabi community. um with my queerness, that was like that was a harder part, because I feel like Sikhi is very pure. To me, Sikhi is very pure. And it's the people who claim to be Sikhs that I feel like kind of ruin that. um well, okay, so I can speak on that, I guess. um because I feel like a lot of people will use Sikhi, a lot of Punjabi people will use Sikhi to affirm their their homophobia, to say like, well, this says this here and this says this here. And that's, I didn't realize actually until recently, because I know there was a really big conversation that we all recently had about whether queer people should be allowed to have the Anand Karaj. But I didn't realize how triggering that is, because here is this, like, here's this Gurbani that I've put on a pedestal, and now you're like weaponizing it and using it against me to throw at me. And I didn't realize how like, at first it was like, actually no, I was gonna say at first it was funny, but it really wasn't ever funny. It was very, it did feel like a weapon, and it did feel like I was losing control, because it was like, this is something that I always had and turned to, and now you're saying that something in it is like fundamentally against me, which is not how I've experienced it at all. Um, so it was really the people is how I would describe it. And when that's not true, like nothing in Gurbani says that only man can marry a woman, by the way.
And with your relationship with Sikhi, how's that been within the queer community? Like, have you felt, you have felt validated as being a person of faith as well as a queer person within queer spaces, not necessarily queer faith spaces, but
Just queer.
just broader queer spaces?
Um, I don't think I've ever like, I think when I walk into a queer space or a Sikh space, I'm choosing an identity. I'm choosing which I'm gonna bring out. I'm gonna put out there and express. I don't know that I've ever walked into a queer space and been so super forthright with my Sikhi, with my identity. Um, so I don't know. I think I still go through that, where I'm still, when I walk into a space, I'm choosing what I'm gonna be. And it's nice, which is nice about Sarbat, because I was able to bring that together and bring my full self and be like, I am a Sikh, but I'm also queer, and I know that this is a space that I'll be accepted and comfortable in. But so in terms of just queer spaces, I don't know that I've ever really brought my Sikhi out there, because also that's kind of nerve-wracking for me, like, because I know what people are like within the culture, and I'm always like, I don't know, I'm always afraid of like meeting, oh my gosh, it's gonna sound bad, but I'm always afraid of meeting like another Indian person, and they're like, oh, I don't want to have some deep religious conversation sitting like in a casual space. Also, I think it changed being in Modesto, because now I'm like, now my fear is a little bit different. Now I don't want this to get back to my parents, which they know, but it's not something that they're not like, yes, my daughter is gay. It's a process, it's a work in progress.
I think somebody's mentioned it in the chat here, like how it's been, it's been very brave, and kudos to you for your courage, being yourself, as well as being compassionate to the journey your parents are and we're going through. Like them saying you weren't this person before, by moving back closer, as well as being patient with them. And I think, a lot of people may, reflect upon, or may kind of think, I can't go back to where I was because I've grown so much as a person, but how you've actively done that because you want to not prove a point, but I think you just want to show that actually you are the same person, and actually you want them to be part of your life, and to
Yeah.
be part of the process of you growing as a person too.
I mean, don't get me wrong, it was hard. I was very like, I did not want to move back. I did not want to move back at all. It took me forever to like finally be like, okay, I'll move back. And then when I even said I'll move back, I never gave them a month. So I was always like, okay, I'll move back in August, September, October. Like it was mentally for me, I was like, oh my God, I don't know that I can do this. You know, I have so much, just like so much freedom. And it was always in the little things. Like it's not like I want to go out and be out until 4 a.m. But I want to be able to leave the house whenever I want and not be questioned and not have somebody calling me every hour to see where I'm at, you know? And it's a very simple thing. And I kind of sound, I hope I don't sound like ungrateful saying this, but it was like, I didn't want to move back. But at some point you know, it was my relationship with my parents. And I grew up very close to my dad in particular. And I think, I think for him, my mom, so in Indian culture, women are the ones who have the burden of like what do they say, like Loki Gangana, like it's like what will people say? Well, I feel like women are the ones that are the ones that have the responsibility of the honor of like women hold the honor. If something happens to the woman in one family, to a woman in one family, it's like okay, well all the respect, honor is just torn away. Whereas like men can go out and do whatever they want and it's fine because he's a man. So I think for my mom, it was harder for her to hear that I was not straight, because for her, she's a lot more invested in what will people say and how is this going to look. It took me a while to understand why she was the one that was more against it. I think it's because if something happens and people hear about this, they're going to blame her. Like it's going to be on her that, you know, you did this, something happened to your daughter. Look at your daughter now. My dad is a lot more, I feel like he's a lot more open to learning. And so I think for him, it was really important for me to move back because we've been really close. And I could see that he was wanting to learn, but he wasn't ready. And so I couldn't not give him the space to to have that, to the space to learn, this opportunity to grow.
And you said that before you did move back eventually, you were delaying it. Was there something that kind of made you think, or was there anything that happened which made you think, do you know what? No, I need to do this now instead
I
of
just know.
delaying it any further.
No, if I could have delayed it further, I would have delayed it further. But I, at some point, was just like, how long are you gonna delay this? And also, I had like told the people that I live with that I was leaving in a specific month, and so at some point, I had to leave. Like there was no way I couldn't, you know. But even like up to the last day, it was so hard. I was like, I didn't pack. I don't even think I packed until the last like 2 days, if that, if not the last day. Yeah.
It almost sounded like, you know, you felt like you were letting go of some freedoms, like you mentioned, to be going back, and maybe like it may have felt that you maybe it was a fear of reverting back to how it was before, or you know, not understanding how people would react to you, you know, having grown up in, you know, and learned so much about yourself, about the world, about life in such a short space of time, and almost feeling like, how would I fit within this, within what I knew life was like before. And although, and this is one thing I always think about as well, although when we move away, we think that when we go back, you'll be going back into how it was when you left, instead of how it's and how that space where you moved away from has also gone forwards too. And I know
Right.
I've definitely felt like that too. When each time I go back home, I always think, okay, each time I go back home, it's just going to pick up from where I left off in time, and nothing else would have progressed forwards. But obviously, life happens, things happen in the world, and everybody adapts and addresses that in a different way. So I think that's how I can kind of relate to that.
Yeah.
afraid of going back home sometimes?
No, I mean, last time I lived with my family, with my parents, was when I was 18, 19. So now I'm like 23, 24. And even though I've grown, they haven't seen that growth. So like that, even learning to live with them again, both of us, both me and my parents had to adjust. Because of course I have to be respectful of their rules and like what they want, but also they also have to acknowledge that I have grown and that I can make certain decisions and all of that. But it's true. Like I remember coming back here and thinking like, oh, I'm going back to Modesto. There's nothing in Modesto. Like, what am I going to do there? There's still really nothing here, but there is like, there is much more. Like, there's like, I don't know. There's like food.
Like, do you know what? That's always the great thing about going back home, and that's the one thing I always toy with about. Should I move back home? The fridge is always full.
Yeah. The fridge is always full. Oh, it is. It's true. Oh my God. That's actually, yeah. And I think that was, not that that was like a decision, but I was like, okay, well, like at least I can always just, go eat.
Yeah.
That's funny.
So now you're back in Modesto. What's life for you like right now? Like, what are you doing for work, and what's just life like for you right now?
I went and got, I'm actually back in school. So I'm doing some prerequisites to apply for my master's next year. I want to go back to school for clinical or counseling, psychology, some branch of psychology. And then after that, I want to get licensed. But right now, yeah, I'm just in school. I work at a women's center, which I love. I work with victims and survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault. So it's that, and it's nice because that is a lot more in the field that I want to be in. I want to be, when I am licensed, I want to be helping women. I want to be helping queer women. And so it all, I feel like now, maybe it was meant to be, because now I feel like things are starting to tie in a little bit. Wow.
Do you feel like they're starting to, like, it's like the stars are aligning, or do you feel that because you've moved back home to then see things in a different way, and maybe finding opportunities as opposed to opportunities coming to you?
Yeah, well, I had to get a job, and that, like, I remember, because remember looking at like internships, because I knew that I wanted to go into psych, which I still like kind of am, but looking for internships. But this just kind of fell into, like, I found it, I applied, and it was like boom, 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 and all of a sudden I have this job. And it makes me feel like, oh my God, I kind of wish I had looked for things like this in the Bay, because I know I would have found so much. Like, I know I would have found so much, but it's okay. We're not gonna do regrets.
And also as well, you've mentioned as well finding Sarbat and engaging with Sarbat. Like, what has your journey been like with Sarbat, and what kind of things have you been doing with the group?
Well, I could not believe like Sarbat was an organization. I thought that was like, I didn't like this. Sarbat was my first experience with Queer Six, and that was, I remember I was at a social, and I remember, like, I know a lot of people have felt like this, but feeling like, oh my God, wow, I'm not alone. Like, there's all these people. And I think for me, it was like, and they're not young. Like, not that you guys aren't young, but like there are so many older people, that there's aunties, like there's so many people who I'm like, wow, I thought a space like this would just be like the younger generation, but it was really affirming to see people outside of my age group being queer, being sick. Like, that was an incredible experience. And that's when I like started volunteering, and I tried to get as involved as I could. And that was a lot of fun. I think Sarbat, so when I would come home, I remember, like, I started asking my dad before I came out. I started asking my dad, like, oh, what does Siki say about being gay, and da, 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 like planting seeds. And he was like, no, it doesn't say anything, like super proud of his religion. Little did he know. But then I think I started doing that more and more. And I think at some point I shared with them that I was volunteering with Sarbat. I was attending these socials. And I think at some point for him, it was like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Why are you, And I just remember like sitting there, like, because I had a plan. Like I had a plan of when I was going to come out. It wasn't going to be this. It wasn't going to be last year. It was going to be this year. Um, and I'm sitting there on the couch, and he's like, "Why are you doing this?" And I'm like, "Well, Saki doesn't say anything about being queer, and Saki should have spaces for queer folks, and I want to create spaces like that. And he's like, "But why you? Why do you have to be the one?" And it was just like he kept asking me, and I remember like it literally just came out of me. Like I was like, "Well, I like men and I like women," and that's kind of what I said. Um, and oh my god, it went silent. The room went silent. It was insane. It was like it was the loudest silence I'd ever sat in. And then I remember my grandma in another room like calling for me, and it was like it was a Hail Mary, because I was like, yes, get me out of this room, get me out. But my experience with Sarbat, to circle back to your question, has been incredible. I love, meeting more people that are queer and sick, because I'm able to bring both my identities and bring both of those parts of me into those spaces, and know that they're not going to be rejected, know that I'm not going to have to debate someone about whether this is right or wrong. Um, I love that. I love that about Sarbat.
And it's great. It's also great to hear as well how you've also kind of used, talking about Sudbet as an entity as part of your, almost like as part of your coming out story, and actually, questioning it and saying, that you're being part of things in order to say to people who may not believe that there can be such thing as queer people and Sikh, that actually there are, because you're engaging with a group which ultimately is for
Mhm.
queer Sikh people.
No, that was a big reason why I did it that way, is because I wanted them to understand, like, it's not just me, it's not just you. Like, it's not, you are not the only Indian parents that are dealing with this. And I think even I mean, it kind of worked with that mindset, but not entirely, because they still feel very, I feel like at first they felt very like, no, nobody has ever gone through what I'm going through right now. And I remember telling them, like, I can get you connected. Like, you can talk to parents whose kids have come out, Indian parents whose kids have come out. You can talk to like Indian or queer Indian people who are older than me, who, you might like feel like have more experience or wiser or whatever. At that point they weren't ready for it, and I had to just respect that. And I mean, I'm still kind of respecting that, but I'm ready. Like, as soon as they tell me that they like may want to speak to somebody, I'm like, yes, please. Like, I can get you. I'll get you connected. I want them. I want them to talk to other people that are not me, because I think that would help. I think they need to know that they're not the only ones dealing with this. Yeah, and have that shame.
Yeah. When you say shame, is that shame from your side or shame from their side?
Shame from their side. I think, because I remember telling them, like, they're like, because I remember telling them, like, I'm proud of this. Like, I'm not proud. And my mom was like, how could you ever be proud of this? Like, how could you ever be proud? And I remember telling her, like, it took me years to unlearn the shame that I was taught growing up here of being queer. Um, and so now I am proud. And I feel like that was me trying to explain to her, like, you also could, she wasn't ready at that point, but you could also be proud. And she was like, no, that's not happening. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. But it was, I think, shame from their side. I think the agreement that we kind of came to was like, you I mean, they're still learning, so I don't want to say anything to make them sound terrible, but I think the agreement was like, you can do whatever you want to do, we just don't want to be involved with it, really. um and we're not really ready to learn, we're not really ready to read anything, we're not really ready for all of that. And I think my dad is going to be the one. Like, my dad is going to be the one that's more open and more like, okay, let's talk about this, or like, what does this mean? And I think that will trigger my mom to be like, okay, fine, whatever. Yeah. But see, the thing is, I have my plan. Like, I still have a plan of like when things are going to happen. I need to let go of that, because I have a plan of like, okay, by June it'll be this, by, like, da da da. And I can't do that. Like, I'm realizing that I can't put a time on their learning and their experience of it. That's not fair.
And how does it make you feel that, that you have to like almost like hold back the progress and actually do things on their terms? Because surely that must also have an impact and knock-on effect on you as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's frustrating. It's so frustrating because I feel like if they could just talk to somebody, if they could just read something, like things would melt so much faster. Things would, we'd progress, we'd be somewhere. Um, oh no, I don't know why this keep happening.
Okay, don't worry about it. You keep on going.
Okay. Okay. But yeah, I definitely feel like it's frustration. It's like I know that there are so many resources out there that would change their experience and change the way that they feel, and people they could meet that would help them grow so much faster. But again, that's still me putting a time limit on it, and it's frustrating. It's frustrating to really just accept that this is their journey, and I can only do whatever they're ready for.
And how are you personally like processing that frustration? Like like you can keep that frustration inside, but are you doing anything to help you relieve that frustration?
I journal and I write and I talk to like my friends and my sisters. My sisters are very, very supportive. Oh my God, they were like the silver lining of my clouds, or whatever the cool, whatever the cool is. But no, talking to them was so, so helpful, and they're very much like team me, which is nice because I think when I didn't live here and I was in the Bay, my sisters are the ones that my parents had to talk to, and they weren't ready to talk to me. They weren't ready to be very upfront with their feelings, but they were telling my sisters like, this is wrong, how could she do this, or what do you think about this, or things like that. And it was really nice to have my sisters to really tell them, well, like, no, it's not wrong actually, and this and this and this and XYZ. So I've really just I'm a like an external processor. I'm a venter. Like if I don't vent, if I keep things in, I will explode. And so they've been everything. Like the people that I'm around have been everything in that experience.
No, that's great, and I think that's also like some really great advice to give to people who may be watching this as well around, not keeping it in and actually sharing it in whichever platform you feel is best for you. And that could be sharing it externally with other people or just sharing it externally with yourself. And actually having that outlet is crucial in order to, to look after your own mental health and well-being.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think it's hard because I don't want to ever sound like a broken record, like it's hard because the situation with my parents is moved so slow. So like me venting to them is always like I'm saying the same things over and over and over again, but the feelings are still there. And I just have to say it over and over and over again. And I'm just have to hope that like the people that love me are gonna listen over and over and over again.
That's great. We've actually got lots of comments coming in saying, thank you so much for sharing your story. Truly inspiring and very heartwarming to listen to. It feels very nice to relate on many points. And Harpreet, I really appreciate you sharing your experiences with us. I'm sure your story is impacting folks in the space who might not have the capacity to express themselves in their identities as openly. Thank you for your vulnerability, confidence, and courage in all the work you do in supporting queer Sikhs. So, yeah, so
Thank you. It's crazy because I don't really feel like I feel like I'm just thank you. No, thank you. That's very sweet. Wow.
Harpreet, it's been really great talking to you. We've also had a couple of questions and comments come in around there's actually a sexual assault prevention group called Seek Such. If you've not heard of them, you might want to reach out in order to make some connections. So once again, linking in your Sikhi with sexual assault prevention and actually exploring that avenue. So it might be something to explore if you've not heard that already.
Yeah.
And
Wait,
yes,
I'm gonna write that down. It was six such.
yep, Seek Such, yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's it for our chat with Harpreet. So thank you so much, Harpreet, for like sharing your story and sharing what's been happening with your life. And also, I'm sure you're not going to be a stranger to Sarbat either. Just want to quickly tell folks what role are you playing within Sarbat kind of behind the scenes?
Sorry. I'm honestly, I've just been helping wherever is needed. So we do, the socials, and I'll like a lot of brainstorming, a lot of like ideas there. Right now we're working on Metro, like there's a Metro project that we're working on. So with that, what we're doing is there's a bunch of different things actually, which is why we just did a call for volunteers. So if anyone's listening, reach out and we'll like reach back out to you. But with that, we're doing like a resource list to put on our website so that people in all continents, all countries have those resources. Also, we're trying to compile when I was coming out, there was a letter online that I found that helped me so much, because it was like what to do when your kid comes out. And it was so helpful for me to send to my mommy, my aunt, and she like, I think it helped. I hope it helped her. But that letter, I want to create a bunch of different letters like that specifically for DESI parents. So like those letters would be written by other parents, other family members of whose kids have come out, to kind of say like, don't worry, you're not alone. This is normal. It's okay. And this is what you should do. This is how to move forward. This is how like whatever their experience was. So we're doing that. We're also going to be doing an art exhibition pretty soon. So any artists out there, for sure looking for artists, poets, all of that. Yeah, those are the biggest things that are coming to me right now.
And with the resource list, am I right in thinking that you may need some assistance and help from the community in relation for translation of things?
Oh, yes. So, because when I was coming out, it was really hard to articulate, like, there's no real word that I knew to say, oh, I'm gay, I'm like a lesbian, I'm bi, whatever, there's no, not that I knew, there wasn't. So I wanted to create a list of words in Punjabi that mean that. And it's been hard. It's been really hard. So if anyone, like, I'm for sure looking for, if anybody knows words that have already been created for gender, for sexuality, anything under those umbrella terms, yes, please reach out.
Right, and the easiest way to get in contact with us at Sarbat is through our email address, info@sarbat.net, or through our social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just before we go, I've just got a couple of things to plug. So on the 20th of March, we've got an online game boarding social, which is on the 20th of March. The next Gupshup, which we'll be doing, which will be on the first weekend of April, and it will be another person from the States, and we'll be making our way across the world from there. So that's the next Gupshup, first weekend in April. Sarbat's also going to be hosting a Vaisakhi event in partnership with Rainbow DESI Parents as a collaboration event. That is currently pending, but details will be available on the Sarbat social media. And then also at the end of April, we'll be hosting a mental health event in partnership with Open Minds, which will be on the 25th of April. So that's all the plugs for me. Thank you to everybody who's been watching today. And if you've not caught this, you'll be catching it again on YouTube, and everything will be available to watch back. Once again, thank you so much to Harpreet for joining me today for this Gupshup. I hope you've found it useful to be able to start to talk and share experiences, because I'm sure lots of people watching will be able to kind of take a lot of learning away from the experiences which you've very kindly shared with us today.
I hope so. Thank you for opening up this space.
That's not a problem. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.